Depending on the assumptions you make, Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and I realize people say, oh, they're contingent liabilities, but they're pretty locked in unless you uncontingent them. The liabilities of those three are anywhere from $60 to $100 trillion. At state level, the state governments today are about $3 trillion underwater. Municipal governments, you see in Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania, I think just got taken over yesterday. Municipal governments, I think, are something like $2 trillion underwater. Municipal employee pension funds are $2 trillion. Corporate pension funds are $1 trillion. The biggest problem we have, which never gets talked about at any debate, has not been brought up one time, the trade deficit, which every quarter, all the goods we buy from China and all the foreign oil we buy, it's $7 trillion. It's the beating heart of our problem. Not one question in 8 debates has been asked about it. There's a guy named Dr. Kotlikoff, who's on my radio show. In the Reagan administration, Harvard-trained PhD, head of Boston University's economics department, very low-key guy. They call him the $200 trillion man. He will walk you through a set of mathematics that shows you the liability side of the balance sheet's about $200 trillion. And his math is not that far off when you look at the assumptions. The total assets in our country, let's talk about a balance sheet and an income statement so you can see the scale of the problem we got. All the assets combined, I think, in our country, all the stocks, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, privately held companies, LLCs, all of your companies, okay? All the cash, all the gold, all the real estate adds up to about $50 to $60 trillion in assets. And we have $200 trillion, and some of those are contingent liabilities. But we are upside down. The industrial democracies have a massive problem today we've never had. We are highly over-leveraged. We have to go through a massive deleveraging. And we've built in a welfare state that is completely and totally unsupportable. Now, why this is a crisis, and by the way, Barack Obama is not the problem. Barack Obama is a symptom of a problem. We have to remove Barack Obama. I don't doubt that for a second. We have to remove Barack Obama as President of the United States. But that's only and let's talk about this. We had this the reason you're here today on a Tuesday night, listening to some really great guys who are sacrificing their lives and you guys to come to support in one of these new organizations, when you could be doing anything else, and you're the kind of the thin blue line of what's going to save us. Because I go around and talk to groups. Last night I was in Torrance. It's 100 people. It's always the same 100 guys, men and women, throughout the country every time I go. Okay? That's the scary thing. You are the guys who are really going to save us. So the problem is that these numbers are so esoteric that even the guys on Wall Street, at Goldman Sachs, the guys I work with, and the guys in the Treasury Department, because they've made some massive mistakes, and they're the first to admit that. But it's so tough to tie this together because the numbers are so esoteric when you talk about $1.5 trillion deficits and $3 trillion in federal spending and all this. The reason the Tea Party, after Santelli's rant, the reason the Tea Party revolt came about, it's the first time in our country's history that we've had a center-right movement principally led by women, right? If you look at the Tea Party, for the Jasons and all the guys, and I was out there in the Americans First Prosperity and all the guys, this was the first time there were women out there, right? Moms. And the reason is that the women are the chief operating officer of the American family. You know, they don't need to know it's trillions of dollars. They know that every bag of groceries is $100. They know to fill up an SUV is $100, and they know that Buddy and Sis are going to a state college, state university, coming back $50,000 in debt and living back in their room with the soccer trophies they got, with no job prospects. The reason I named the first film Generation Zero, the generation in their 20s and 30s, we've wiped them out. This is the first time in American history a generation's actually given over command to something, and we haven't passed on any positive increase in net worth. Right? The sad thing about the Occupy Wall Street, when you look at those kids, is how ill-informed they are. That's the product of the American education system. They have no more earthly idea of the fundamentals of our liberty the fundamentals of free market capitalism, and they know absolutely nothing about our history. That's why I call them Generation Zero. We've passed on zero net worth, and we've really, and yet I see part of that, my daughter's part of that generation, that are fighting a war that's tougher than any war that our grandparents fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. So there is tremendous potential there. But we are passing them on unless we act immediately, unless groups like you can come together, because the political establishment is not going to do it. And people go, how can you say that? I say, let's just look at the empirical evidence. Since the Tea Party revolt, which the Republican establishment did not support, and if you remember and look back, go to Fox and look at guys I respect tremendously, William Kristol, Dr. Krauthammer, David Fromm, you look at all the, George Will, look at all the intelligentsia of the Republican Party and the conservative intelligentsia. They were mocking the Tea Party. They were mocking these grassroots organizations. The reason I made these films is that my buddies on Wall Street kept saying, oh, these women are a bunch of bimbos. Or, I said, I know Governor Palin and I know Congressman Bachmann, I know these women of the Tea Party. They're every bit as tough and smart as you guys are. I mean, think about it. If the elites are so good, how did we get in this jam? Right? But here's the part that and that's why groups like you, I'm not promoting you. If you don't hang together, this country falls apart. We'll become something very different at the other side of this crisis, because this is the fourth great crisis in American history. We had the Revolution, we had the Civil War, we had the Great Depression of World War II. This is the great fourth turning in American history. And we're going to be one thing on the other side. And by the way, the reason this is so tough is that before, we didn't have competitors like China, or we weren't in hock to guys that are our enemies, or we had an education and a value system of Judeo-Christian values that a guy like Abraham Lincoln could read the King James Bible, Shakespeare's plays, and Plutarch's Lives of the Noble Greeks and Romans, and that's all he had, right? And he wrote the Second Inaugural Address and the Gettysburg Address, because that's all you needed, right? If you look at it for a second, the victory in 2010, and because of groups of Club for Growth, Americans for Prosperity, the Tea Party movement, grassroots movement, it was an unprecedented victory, right? Not only at the federal level. If you go down and look at the state level, if you look at, we eviscerated the Democratic Party in the South and in the Midwest, in state legislatures and governorships. It was a massive victory. We got virtually no credit for that, right? The mainstream media and even the Republican apparatus. Remember, the Republican Party came out with a marketing document 60 days before that that said we're going to cut $100 billion, the pledge to America, right? Okay. The two big things, TARP being one, the second being the budget cuts after the 2010, right? The first budget, we cut $30 billion. And by the way, the Tea Party Patriots, if you go to Jenny Beth Martin and Mark Meckler's site, they say we actually increased by $3 billion. But it was a $30 billion cut, not a $100 billion cut, because of all kind of, we're prorated, we're in the year. The second was the debt debate. The federal spending, which is every bit as bad as the deficit, it's the scale of federal spending because it sucks dollars out from everywhere else. Federal spending, I think, is $3.75 trillion for the next 2 years, roughly. It adds up to $7.5 trillion in 2 years. In the debt debate we just had, we cut $60 billion. $20 billion one year and $40 billion the next. Those numbers are irrelevant, right? Because the system lacks the political courage to actually take it on. The hardest, nastiest days, if you look at Europe, just look what's happening. Look what happened in House of Commons yesterday when some conservatives stood up and said, we've had it with Europe. We want out. We want out of this whole mess. And they turned on each other. I said this on Hannity back in February 2010 when he had me. They had a special for Generation Zero, the first time outside the Passion of the Christ they'd ever taken an hour for one movie. And I said, all the easy choices aren't back of us. All the easy decisions were years ago. Everything from here on in is going to be hard and nasty and ugly, and you're going to be called every name in the book. You're going to be vilified. And we did cross a line this past week on the Occupy Wall Street. Only, I believe, in the revolution were there any marches on Tories' houses. When they left and they marched on Rupert Murdoch's house, and Jamie Dimon's house, and Mr. Koch's house, and there was one other. 4 houses they actually marched on. That shows you the types of things that are going to happen. Cutting this budget, why is the budget not cut? Budget's not cut because it's not easy to cut. Everybody's going to have to take a hit here. And if we draw a line, and it has to be a tough line, that no more taxes, no more tax increases. You're just exacerbating a problem. You're going to see this election. Newt Gingrich said on my show the other night, he thinks it's the most important since 1860. I think this election is going to be the nastiest, ugliest in the history of this country. It's going to be Americans for Prosperity. I end the film The Undefeated. By the way, the film's not about Sarah Palin. It is Sarah Palin's story. But the reason I wanted to do it is that she is Walmart Nation. When the movie starts off, she's working on a commercial fishing boat in 1988 with her husband. They own a small commercial fishing boat. And she's not part of the cultural, political, economic, or social elite in the Matsu Valley, which is out of the loop in a state that's out of the loop, right? She is so obscure. She's more obscure than anybody in America today when she starts off. And 20 years later, she's risen by being constant on a handful of principles. But the undefeated is the values of the Tea Party. It's the values. I've been around this country now for 3 years, showing these films and talking to these Tea Party groups. And these are the people that are, as Rick Santelli so brilliantly observed, they're those who carry the water, not those who drink the water. They're the ones that hold our social organizations together, build our cities, run our little leagues, fight our wars, right? It's the backbone of this country. And they're enraged, and here's why they're enraged. They understand we have a system now that has socialism, as you pointed out so eloquently. We have socialism for the very poor, right? A system that $1 trillion a year in welfare state benefits with no taxes, right? And 60% of the country getting that. And we have socialism for the very wealthy, right? The anger of the Tea Party is not racism. They're not homophobes. They're not nativist. What they are is common sense, practical, middle-class people that understand that they're paying for their own and their children's destruction, right? And that's the rage. You know, the bonus pool this year, the bonus pool on Wall Street of all the financial firms in 2007, the year before, in 2006 and 2007, the 2 years were all the transactions that imploded in 2008. The bonus pool is going to be about the same this year, right? You know, TARP, when you said TARP, if our business, if your business or your business had gotten in trouble and Goldman Sachs, where I was trained, had come in and given you a financing, trust me, you would have been wiped out and you would have been fired, right? They weren't. All their stock is worth a ton of money because they weren't. We basically gave them free money and bailed them out. There's no recession in the Hamptons. There's no recession in Georgetown. The other day, the Washington Post reports 5 of the 7 wealthiest counties in the country are the suburbs of Washington, D.C. The per capita income in Washington, D.C., for the first time in history, is greater than Silicon Valley. That is not a random event. What Sarah Palin, the reason I wanted to make the movie, Sarah Palin went up against the political class in Alaska and big oil. Because it wasn't that it was corrupt. There's always going to be corruption. There's always going to be bad guys taking money. That's human nature. Read Plutarch. That happened back in Greece and Rome. We have something much worse. A compromised political class. Crony capitalism and a permanent political class